The morning sun had barely crested the rolling hills of Willow Creek, Texas, when I glanced out my bedroom window and froze. There, in the middle of our sprawling ranch, sat a neon-pink SUV, trapped inside a labyrinth of wooden fences like a lab rat in some twisted experiment. The driver, a woman with a voice shrill enough to wake the dead, was pounding on her windows, screaming curses that echoed across the pastures. On the front porch, my grandfather, Henry Caldwell, rocked gently in his chair, sipping coffee as if this were just another Tuesday. His weathered face held a faint smile, the kind that hinted at a plan so brilliant it could only come from a man who'd spent 4 decades outsmarting the world. To understand how Henry turned a neighborhood bully into the talk of the town, we need to rewind 3 months to the day Margaret Hensley stormed onto our property, armed with a clipboard and a vendetta that threatened to unravel our family's legacy. The Caldwell Ranch had stood proud on the outskirts of Willow Creek since 1958, a 50-acre haven of golden pastures, sturdy oaks, and a red barn that had weathered storms both literal and figurative. My father, James, had taken over the reins when Henry retired from his career as a civil engineer, a profession that had seen him build bridges and skyscrapers across Texas. Life was quiet, predictable, the kind of existence where the loudest disruption was a rooster crowing at dawn. That is, until Margaret Hensley arrived. It was a humid Tuesday morning when the screech of brakes shattered the stillness. I was out by the eastern fence line with Dad, hammering new posts into the dry earth, when a bubblegum-pink Ford Explorer skidded to a halt at our front gate. The door flew open, and out stepped a woman who looked like she'd been dressed by a committee of overzealous pageant coaches. Her hot pink tracksuit was so bright it could have guided ships in a fog. Oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, and her bleach-blonde hair, teased into a helmet of curls, defied both gravity and good taste. She clutched a matching pink clipboard, wielding it like a scepter, and her fake nails long enough to double as steak knives glinted in the sunlight. "I'm Margaret Hensley," she announced, her voice dripping with self-importance, president of the Silver Oaks Homeowners Association and official compliance officer. "I'm here to address your property's flagrant violations of community standards." Dad, wiping sweat from his brow, squinted at her as if she'd just spoken in tongues. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. This is the Caldwell Ranch. We've been here since before your subdivision was a twinkle in some developer's eye. We don't answer to any HOA." Margaret's lips curled into a smirk that could curdle milk. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "I don't care if your little cow patch predates the Alamo. Rules are rules, and I'm here to enforce them." What followed was a tirade that would have made a drill sergeant blush. Waving her clipboard like a conductor's baton, Margaret rattled off a litany of supposed infractions. Our cedar fence was too rustic and needed to be painted in an approved shade. The barn's red paint was an eyesore. Our John Deere tractor, parked in the same spot for a decade, was unsightly agricultural equipment. The mailbox was 2 inches too tall. The gravel driveway was the wrong hue. Even our chickens, clucking contentedly in their coop, were a public nuisance. She had issues with everything from our roof tiles to the way we parked our pickup. Dad tried reasoning with her, explaining that our ranch, established in 1958, was grandfathered under state law and exempt from HOA rules. But Margaret clapped her hands, letting out a laugh that sounded like a hyena on helium. "Grandfathered? Sweetheart, I don't care if your great-granddaddy built this place with his bare hands. My authority comes from the Silver Oaks HOA, backed by Texas law. You have 7 days to fix these violations, or you'll face fines of $500 per day. Per violation." She thrust a thick folder of papers at Dad, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Don't even think about fighting this in court. My legal team eats ranchers like you for breakfast." As she strutted back to her pink monstrosity, blasting a country song loud enough to rattle the windows, I noticed Henry standing on the porch. Coffee mug in hand, he watched Margaret with the calm intensity of a hawk sizing up its prey. His faded jeans and scuffed boots gave him the look of a retired cowboy, but those sharp eyes, honed by years of solving impossible engineering problems, missed nothing. He didn't say a word, just sipped his coffee and let Margaret rant, oblivious to the fact that she'd just poked a sleeping bear. Dad clutched the folder, his knuckles white. "This is insanity, Pop," he muttered as Henry joined us. We can't let this woman bully us. Henry set his mug on the porch railing with a soft clink. Patience, James, he said, his voice steady as ever. Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to let your opponent think they're winning. A slow smile spread across his face, the kind that made me wonder if Margaret Hensley had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Desperate to avoid a legal battle, Dad decided to play nice. The next morning, we repainted the fence in a shade called desert sand, a beige so dull it could put an insomniac to sleep. Dad figured a show of good faith might get Margaret off our backs. He was wrong. Like clockwork, Margaret rolled up every morning at 9 a.m., parking her SUV at the edge of our property line. She'd march out with her clipboard, snapping photos and scribbling notes, each visit bringing a fresh list of absurd complaints. The beige fence was slightly off-tone from the HOA's approved palette. The tractor needed to be hidden from view, despite being essential to our work. She even measured the grass with a ruler, claiming one patch was a quarter-inch too tall. I started noticing Henry keeping a notebook, jotting down every detail of Margaret's visits, her arrival times, her complaints, even the shade of pink she wore each day. The woman had an entire closet of pink outfits, from blazers to boots, as if she'd decided to brand herself as a walking flamingo. Dad grew more frayed by the day, snapping at Mom and me over trivial things. Mom stayed up late, worrying about the fines Margaret kept threatening. We held tense family meetings, with Dad pushing to hire a lawyer. Henry, though, remained calm. Patience, son, he'd say, his voice like a steady hand on the tiller. The best defense is a well-planned offense. Things took a darker turn when Margaret escalated her campaign. She started bringing a documentation specialist, her cousin Carl, a sweaty man in a too-tight suit who filmed our every move with a shaky camcorder. They'd stand just outside our property line, recording and muttering about lawsuits. One afternoon, Dad lost it, shouting at them about harassment. His voice cracked with frustration as Margaret smirked, her phone out, recording his outburst for evidence. Henry stepped in, placing a hand on Dad's shoulder. "Go inside, James," he said softly. "Let's not give her what she wants." As Dad stormed off, Henry faced Margaret and Carl with a quiet confidence that made the air feel heavy. He didn't say much, just smiled a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. That night, I found Henry in the basement, hunched over his old drafting table. Blueprints were spread out, covered in precise measurements and notes in his meticulous handwriting. When I asked what he was working on, he chuckled. "Sometimes, the best way to solve a problem is to catch it off guard. Just wait, Tommy. This is going to be something." The Texas sun beat down on the Caldwell Ranch, turning the air thick and heavy, but the real heat was coming from Margaret Hensley's relentless campaign. Every morning, like a vengeful alarm clock, her neon-pink Ford Explorer rolled up to our property line at 9 a.m. sharp. She'd step out, clipboard in hand, her latest pink ensemble screaming for attention. Yesterday, a blazer that could have doubled as a traffic cone. Today, a pair of cowboy boots that probably cost more than our monthly feed bill. Her cousin Carl trailed behind, his camcorder wobbling as he filmed our violations like he was auditioning for a true crime documentary. Margaret's complaints grew more absurd by the day. A fence post leaning half an inch off plumb, a patch of clover disrupting the aesthetic harmony, even our roosters crowing, which she claimed violated noise ordinances. Dad was unraveling. The man who'd once laughed off a tornado warning was now pacing the kitchen at night, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits. Mom, usually the family's rock, had dark circles under her eyes, her worry over Margaret's threatened fines, now totaling thousands, keeping her awake. I wasn't faring much better. At 25, I'd seen my share of tough times on the ranch, but this felt different. Margaret wasn't just a nuisance. She was a force of bureaucratic destruction, and we were her target. Through it all, Grandpa Henry remained a pillar of calm. He'd sit on the porch each morning, coffee in hand, watching Margaret's theatrics with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a bug. His notebook grew thicker, filled with timestamps, photos, and detailed observations of her behavior. He noted her blind spots, her habits, even the exact spot where she parked her SUV every day, always angled to block our gate. "She's predictable," he said one evening, his voice low and deliberate. "And predictability is a weakness." I started noticing Henry spending more time in the basement, the soft glow of his desk lamp spilling into the hallway past midnight. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I crept downstairs and found him hunched over his drafting table, surrounded by blueprints and surveying tools that hadn't seen daylight since his engineering days. The drawings were intricate grids of measurements, angles, and notations that looked like plans for a small city. "What's all this, Grandpa?" I asked, peering over his shoulder. He glanced up, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Tommy, sometimes the best way to deal with a storm is to build a shelter that traps it. You'll see." He patted my shoulder and went back to his sketches, the scratch of his pencil mingling with a chuckle that made me both nervous and excited. Margaret, oblivious to Henry's plotting, doubled down. She started bringing what she called her security detail, two burly cousins named Eddie and Ray, who showed up in mismatched camo gear and spent most of their time guzzling energy drinks and glaring at us. They drove a beat-up pickup with a Confederate flag sticker, parking it next to Margaret's SUV like a makeshift blockade. One morning, she arrived with a new weapon, a stack of legal papers she claimed was a $7,500 fine for ongoing defiance of Silver Oak's covenants. She waved them around, her voice rising to a screech. "This ranch is a blight on our community. Pay up, or I'll have a lien on your property by next month." Dad snapped. "This is extortion," he shouted, his face red as he jabbed a finger at the papers. "You've got no right to fine us for existing." Margaret, phone out and recording, smirked. "Oh, this is perfect. Keep yelling, Mr. Caldwell. This'll look great in court." Eddie and Ray stepped closer, flexing like they were itching for a fight. I thought Dad might swing, and part of me wanted him to. Henry appeared like a ghost, his hand on Dad's arm. "Easy, James," he said, his voice a calm anchor in the storm. "Go cool off. I'll handle this." Dad hesitated, then stormed into the house, slamming the door. Henry turned to Margaret, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp as a blade. "Miss Hensley," he said, "are you sure you want to play this game with me?" Margaret puffed up, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "Old man, I've got the full backing of the Silver Oaks Board in Texas law. You're just a has-been rancher with a chip on his shoulder." Her cousin snickered, but Henry's smile only widened, cold and calculating. "We'll see about that," he said and walked away, leaving Margaret fuming. That afternoon, I caught Henry on the phone, his voice low as he spoke to someone about county records and resident verification. He hung up, scribbled a note, and headed back to the basement. The blueprints were evolving, now showing what looked like interlocking panels around a specific point on our property line, the exact spot where Margaret parked. When I asked what he was building, he just said, "Trust me, Tommy. Sometimes you gotta let a bully think they're winning before you pull the rug out." The next week, Henry started what he called routine maintenance. Delivery trucks from Willow Creek Lumber rolled in, unloading stacks of wooden panels, galvanized brackets, and custom hardware. Each piece was measured to the millimeter, inspected by Henry with the precision of a man who'd built highways. He began erecting fence sections around the property, but they didn't connect to the existing fence line. They popped up in odd places, like puzzle pieces waiting for a picture to form. Dad and I exchanged confused looks, but Henry just smiled. "Patience, boys. Big fish take time to catch." Margaret, predictably, lost her mind. She started filming every hammer strike, accusing Henry of malicious construction and psychological harassment. She'd march over with Eddie and Ray, demanding blueprints and threatening lawsuits. Henry responded with infuriating calm. "Just fixing my property, ma'am. Last I checked, that's legal in Texas." Since everything was on our land, built to code, she had no leverage, and it drove her wild. Our neighbors began to notice the drama. Old man George Harper, who'd tangled with the HOA himself, dropped by with a toolbox and an offer to help. Ellen Ramsey, the HOA's overworked treasurer, started accidentally leaking details about Margaret's latest schemes. Half of Silver Oaks was fed up with her reign of terror, but too scared to speak out. Ellen's tidbits confirmed what Henry suspected. Margaret's obsession with our ranch wasn't just about rules. Something bigger was at play. One morning, Margaret upped the ante, arriving with a sleazy lawyer named Vernon Tate. Vernon, in a cheap suit and with hair slicked back like a used car salesman, presented a temporary restraining order to halt Henry's spiteful construction. Margaret beamed, thinking she'd won. Vernon puffed out his chest, lecturing us about community standards and legal consequences. Henry read the order, chuckled, and pulled out a folder of his own surveys, permits, and photos proving every panel was legal and on our property. Vernon's bravado crumbled. He stammered, flipping through his notes, while Margaret shrieked about injustice. Henry's voice stayed even. "Mr. Tate, did your client mention that she doesn't even live in Silver Oaks?" I checked county records. Her address is a rundown apartment across town. Margaret's face went white, her sunglasses slipping. For a moment, I thought she might faint. She recovered with a venomous glare. "You'll regret this, you old fool. I'll have the IRS audit you, health inspectors crawling over this dump, and every agency in Texas knocking." Her threats grew wilder, bulldozing our ranch, ruining our name. As she stormed off with Vernon in tow, Henry watched, his expression serene but satisfied. That night, I found him in the basement, his surveying tools spread out beside property maps and legal documents. The blueprints were now a complex web of panels, centered on Margaret's parking spot. "What's the endgame, Grandpa?" I asked. He grinned, tapping the plans. "Sometimes, Tommy, you don't fight a bully head-on. You let him dig their own grave and hand him the shovel. We're just speeding things up." The air in Willow Creek was thick with anticipation, like the calm before a Texas thunderstorm. Margaret Hensley's daily assaults on the Caldwell Ranch had become a grim routine, her pink Ford Explorer a garish fixture at our gate. Each morning, she'd arrive with her entourage cousins Eddie and Ray in their camo gear, and occasionally Vernon Tate, the strip mall lawyer who seemed to regret taking her case. Her clipboard was now a weapon of war, her complaints growing so absurd they bordered on parody. One day, she claimed our oak tree's shadows were trespassing on Silver Oaks property. The next, she measured our mailbox's tilt with a protractor, declaring it a safety hazard. Her obsession was no longer about rules, it was personal. Dad was a wreck. The fines Margaret threatened had climbed to $10,000, with daily penalties stacking up like firewood. He'd stopped sleeping, his eyes bloodshot as he pored over legal websites, convinced we'd lose the ranch. Mom tried to keep the family together, but her forced smiles couldn't hide her fear. I felt helpless, watching our legacy unravel under the weight of one woman's vendetta. Yet through it all, Grandpa Henry remained unshaken. His morning ritual coffee on the porch, notebook in hand, never wavered. He watched Margaret's theatrics with the patience of a chess master waiting for his opponent's fatal move. Henry's basement had become a war room. Blueprints covered every surface, their lines and angles forming a plan I couldn't decipher. Surveying tools, dusted off from his engineering days, sat beside stacks of legal documents and property maps. He'd started making calls to old contact city planners, county officials, even a retired judge he'd worked with on a dam project. "Just tying up loose ends," he'd say when I asked, but his sly grin told me he was building something bigger than a fence. Margaret's behavior grew erratic. She'd taken to parking her SUV in the same spot every day, angled to block our gate, as if daring us to confront her. She'd sit there for hours, binoculars in hand, watching our every move like a hawk. Eddie and Ray, her so-called security, loafed nearby, their attempts at intimidation undermined by their constant bickering over fantasy football. Margaret's routine was predictable: arrive at 9 a.m., harass us until 11, leave for a nail appointment at Glitz and Glam Salon, return at 1:30 with fresh pink talons, and stay until 4 p.m. Henry noted every detail in his log, from her arrival times to the brand of energy drinks Ray chugged. "Patterns," he said one evening, tapping his notebook. "They're the key to everything." The routine maintenance Henry had started was anything but routine. Delivery trucks from Willow Creek Lumber kept coming, unloading wooden panels each 6 feet high, 3 feet wide, treated with weatherproof coating and fitted with custom brackets. He'd erect them in seemingly random spots around our property, always near Margaret's parking area. The panels didn't connect to our existing fence, and their placement made no sense to Dad or me. Henry would measure each section with a surveyor's precision, double-checking angles with a level and muttering calculations under his breath. When Dad asked what the hell he was doing, Henry just chuckled. "Trust me, James. Sometimes you gotta build the stage before the show starts." Margaret's paranoia spiked. She started filming Henry's every move, her camera rolling as she accused him of conspiring against the community. One morning, she marched over with Eddie and Ray, demanding to see his blueprints. "This is a spite fence," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "I'll have you arrested for malicious construction." Henry, hammering a bracket into place, didn't even look up. "Ma'am, I'm just maintaining my property. Check the County Code Section 251.002, if memory serves." His calm infuriated her, and she stormed off, vowing to end this nonsense. The neighborhood was buzzing. George Harper, our grizzled neighbor, started dropping by daily, offering tools and stories of his own HOA battles. Ellen Ramsey, the Silver Oaks treasurer, grew bolder, slipping us copies of HOA meeting minutes that showed Margaret's iron grip on the board. Residents were fed off her fines, her bullying, her insistence on painting every mailbox the same shade of taupe. Ellen whispered that Margaret's finances were shady, with rumors of padded invoices and missing funds. Henry listened, his eyes narrowing. "Interesting," was all he said, but I could tell he was adding it to his mental blueprint. The turning point came on a sweltering Monday. Margaret arrived in a red power suit that looked like it belonged on a game show host, her hair teased to new heights. She wasn't alone. Two men in ill-fitting blazers, introduced as her legal consultants, flanked her. With a flourish, she served us a new notice, a $12,000 fine and a threat to place a lien on the ranch if we didn't comply within 30 days. "This is your last chance," she crowed, waving a stack of papers. "Silver Oaks will not tolerate your defiance." Dad exploded. "This is our home," he roared, snatching the papers and tearing them in half. "You're a fraud, and I'll prove it." Margaret, phone out, recorded his outburst, her smile venomous. "Oh, this is gold. Keep going, cowboy. You're digging your own grave." Eddie and Ray stepped forward, fists clenched, and for a moment, I thought it might come to blows. Henry stepped in, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. James inside. "Now." Dad glared but obeyed, muttering curses as he went. Henry faced Margaret, his posture relaxed, but his eyes hard as steel. "Miss Hensley," he said, "you're playing a dangerous game. I've done some digging myself. Did you know county records list your address as Pinewood Apartments, not Silver Oaks? Funny, for someone claiming to represent the community." Margaret froze, her sunglasses slipping. For a split second, panic flickered across her face, but she recovered with a snarl. "You're lying. I'll bury you, old man. I've got connections you can't imagine." Her threats grew: wild IRS audits, health inspections, even turning our ranch into a strip mall. As she sped off, her SUV's tires kicking up gravel, Henry watched, his expression unreadable but deeply satisfied. That evening, I found him in the basement, his blueprints now a labyrinth of lines converging on Margaret's parking spot. He was cross-referencing property deeds with county ordinances, his old surveying transit set up like a sniper's scope. "She's slipping," he said, not looking up. "Desperate people make mistakes, Tommy. We just need to give her enough rope." Henry's calls to old contacts intensified. He spoke with a county surveyor about boundary lines, a lawyer friend about HOA jurisdiction, and Ellen Ramsey about financial records. Each conversation added a piece to his puzzle, and I realized he wasn't just building a fence, was building a case. The wooden panels, now numbering in the dozens, were part of something bigger, something designed to use Margaret's habits against her. The construction grew more deliberate. Henry would spend hours measuring the area around Margaret's parking spot, pretending to fix drainage issues. The panels were modular, designed to interlock at precise angles, and he'd assemble them with a speed that belied his 70 years. Margaret's accusations grew frantic. She called the sheriff, claiming Henry was building unauthorized structures. Deputy Mark Ellison, a friend of the family, showed up, took one look at the panels, and laughed. "Looks like solid work, Henry," he said, flipping through Henry's permits. "Everything's by the book." Margaret's meltdown was epic. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed, accusing Mark of corruption. Her cousins shuffled awkwardly, clearly embarrassed. Henry, showing Mark the blueprints, explained it as privacy enhancements. Mark nodded, complimenting the craftsmanship, and left Margaret fuming. The neighborhood's support grew. George Harper brought over a thermos of coffee and a willingness to haul lumber. Ellen Ramsey hinted that Silver Oaks residents were planning a revolt against Margaret's board. Even passers-by started honking in solidarity, tired of her tyranny. Henry's plan, whatever it was gaining momentum, and Margaret was too blinded by her ego to see it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Henry called a family meeting. Dad was skeptical, Mom was anxious, but Henry's voice was steady. "She's about to make her final move," he said, spreading his blueprints on the kitchen table. "And when she does, we'll be ready." The plan showed a complex grid of panels, with Margaret's parking spot at the center. "This," he said, tapping the map, "is where it ends." The dawn broke over Willow Creek with a golden glow, but the air crackled with the promise of something monumental. For weeks, Margaret Hensley had terrorized our family, her pink Ford Explorer a daily menace at the Caldwell Ranch gate. Her fines had ballooned to $15,000, her threats now a litany of IRS audits, health inspections, and liens that could choke the life from our 50-acre legacy. Dad was a shadow of himself, his voice hoarse from arguing with lawyers. Mom's hands trembled as she poured coffee, her faith in a peaceful resolution fading. I felt the weight of it too, my stomach knotting each time Margaret's SUV appeared. But Grandpa Henry? He was a rock, his calm unnerving, his eyes alight with the fire of a man who'd already won the war in his mind. Henry's basement had transformed into a command center. Blueprints, now dense with annotations, mapped out a labyrinth of wooden panels centered on Margaret's parking spot. His old surveying tools transit, tapes, levels were in constant use, and his notebook bulged with logs of her every move. 9 a.m. arrivals, 11 a.m. nail appointments, 1:30 p.m. returns. He'd tracked her like a general studying an enemy's habits, and the wooden panels 6 feet high, modular, and precise were his artillery. They dotted our property in a pattern only he understood, each one a piece of a puzzle waiting to snap into place. Margaret, blind to the storm brewing, grew more unhinged. Her accusations had veered into the absurd. Henry was building a fortress to undermine property values, or, wilder still, planning to secede from Texas. She'd called Deputy Mark Ellison 3 times in a week, each complaint more frantic than the last. Mark, a family friend, would show up, glance at Henry's permits, and leave with a grin. "Keep up the good work, Henry," he'd say, tipping his hat. Margaret's cousins, Eddie and Ray, looked increasingly uneasy, their bravado fading as her rants grew shrill. Even Vernon Tate, her sleazy lawyer, started dodging her calls, his cheap suit no match for Henry's legal prep. The neighborhood was electric with gossip. George Harper, our grizzled ally, had rallied other Silver Oaks residents, many of whom had suffered under Margaret's rule. Ellen Ramsey, the HOA treasurer, fed us intel. Margaret's board was cracking, with members questioning her finances. Ellen had found discrepancies, checks to non-existent vendors, invoices signed by Margaret's relatives. Henry listened, his jaw tight. "She's not just a bully," he told me one night, his voice low. "She's hiding something big." Henry's construction had reached a fever pitch. Delivery trucks rolled in daily, unloading more panels, brackets, and hardware, all labeled in his meticulous handwriting. He'd work late, measuring and hammering under floodlights, his movements precise as a surgeon's. The panels were now a network of disconnected walls, clustered around Margaret's parking spot like sentinels. Dad, frustrated, demanded answers. "Pop, what's the point of this? It's not even a fence." Henry just smiled. "It's not about the fence, James. It's about control." The tipping point came on a blistering Thursday. Margaret arrived in a fuchsia dress that screamed desperation, her hair a towering monument to hairspray. She'd brought Eddie, Ray, and a new fascia compliance officer named Dwayne, who looked like he'd been dragged from a dive bar. With theatrical flair, she served us a final ultimatum: pay $20,000 in fines or face a lien and forced compliance. "This ends now," she shrieked, thrusting papers at Dad. "Your little ranch is finished." Dad lost it. "You're a parasite," he roared, crumpling the papers. "I'll burn this place down before I let you take it." Margaret, filming, cackled. "Oh, perfect. Threatening arson. You're done, Caldwell." Eddie and Ray closed in, and I braced for a fight. Henry stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "James, enough." Inside, Dad hesitated, then retreated, cursing. Henry faced Margaret, his calm a stark contrast to her hysteria. Miss Hensley, he said, you've made a lot of noise about authority, but I wonder, does your board know you're siphoning their funds? Those invoices to your cousin's landscaping company look mighty suspicious. Margaret's face drained of color, her sunglasses slipping. You're bluffing, she spat, but her voice wavered. I'll have you in court by sundown. She fled to her SUV, Dwayne scrambling after her, while Eddie and Ray exchanged nervous glances. As she peeled out, Henry watched, his smile cold and deliberate. That night, Henry revealed part of his plan. She's embezzling, he said, spreading Ellen's documents on the kitchen table. Fake contracts, shell company-ish, stolen thousands from Silver Oaks. I've been working with Ellen and Mark to build a case, but we need her to overplay her hand. He tapped his blueprints. This is the bait. The next morning, Margaret made her fatal mistake. Furious at Henry's accusations, she declared a final stand. She parked her SUV directly in front of our gate, blocking access, and announced she wouldn't move until Henry dismantled the panels and paid the fines. I'm protecting this community, she bellowed, calling reporters and local officials. Her SUV sat like a pink fortress, Margaret inside, smug and defiant. Henry didn't flinch. He spent the day preparing, checking panels, and coordinating with a crew of Carpenter's old colleagues who'd built bridges with him in the 80s. Tomorrow, he told me, his eyes gleaming, she learns the difference between tactics and strategy. Dawn broke clear and crisp, the kind of morning that felt made for history. Margaret was in her SUV, sipping coffee and barking into her phone, convinced she'd won. Henry emerged at 6 a.m., flanked by Dad and a team of 6 carpenters, their tool belts clinking with purpose. A truck unloaded the final panels, each marked with Henry's precise notations. I grabbed a coffee and settled on the porch, sensing I was about to witness something legendary. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, Henry directing with the precision of a conductor. They began connecting the scattered panels, linking them with new sections to form a geometric pattern around the front of our property. Margaret, engrossed in her calls, didn't notice at first. She was too busy ranting to reporters, promising lawsuits and justice. The sound of hammers and drills, a constant for weeks, blended into the background. By 8 a.m., the pattern emerged a labyrinth of 6-foot walls, twisting and turning in a design that was both chaotic and deliberate. The carpenters worked in sync, slotting panels into brackets, each joint flawless. Henry stood at the center, blueprints in hand, his voice calm but commanding. Section C, 4, 45-degree angle. Double-check the level. The crew nodded, their respect for him palpable. At 9 a.m., Margaret looked up from her phone, and her scream could have shattered glass. Her SUV was surrounded by a maze of wooden walls, a three-dimensional trap with no visible exit. The panels, too high to drive over, formed a prison around her vehicle, each pathway a dead end. The final panel, slotted into place as she watched, sealed her fate. She'd parked herself into Henry's trap, her predictability her undoing. Margaret's panic was immediate. She gunned her engine, the SUV lurching but going nowhere. She honked, a desperate wail, and rolled down her windows, screaming, "This is illegal. Tear it down. You're all going to jail." Her voice cracked, her makeup streaking as she pounded the dashboard. The carpenters paused, grinning, while Henry approached, coffee mug in hand, his face a mask of mock surprise. "Goodness, Miss Hensley," he called, peering through a gap in the maze. "I didn't realize you were still in our construction zone. What a terrible inconvenience." His tone was polite, but his eyes danced with triumph. Margaret's curses grew incoherent, a mix of threats and pleas that drew a crowd: neighbors, reporters, even Silver Oaks residents who'd heard the commotion. Deputy Mark Ellison arrived, summoned by frantic calls about a disturbed woman. He surveyed the maze, his lips twitching with amusement. "Henry, this is something else," he said, flipping through the permits. "All legal, built on your land. She parked there herself, didn't she?" Henry nodded, his smile serene. Mark turned to Margaret, still screaming, "Ma'am, you're trespassing. I suggest you calm down." The crowd grew, phones out, capturing Margaret's meltdown. George Harper hooped, Ellen Ramsey clapped, and reporters scribbled notes. The maze was a masterpiece, functional, legal, and a perfect symbol of poetic justice. Margaret had bullied her way into a corner, and Henry had turned her own game against her. The morning sun blazed over Willow Creek, Texas, casting long shadows from the wooden labyrinth that had ensnared Margaret Hensley's neon-pink Ford Explorer. The Caldwell Ranch, our 50-acre sanctuary, was now the epicenter of a spectacle that had drawn half the town. Margaret, trapped in her self-inflicted prison, alternated between screaming threats and pleading for release, her voice hoarse from hours of rage. Her cousins, Eddie and Ray, stood outside the maze, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Reporters from local news stations jostled for shots, their cameras capturing every frantic gesture. Neighbors, Silver Oaks residents, and curious onlookers formed a growing crowd, their murmurs a mix of amusement and vindication. On the porch, I sipped coffee, my heart pounding with awe at Grandpa Henry's genius. He stood near the maze, his weathered face serene, coffee mug in hand, as if he'd just finished a routine chore. The maze was a marvel, 6-foot panels interlocking in a geometric dance of dead ends and false paths, all built on our property, legal to the last nail. Henry had turned Margaret's predictable parking habit into her downfall, her SUV now a pink monument to hubris. Deputy Mark Ellison, leaning against his cruiser, couldn't hide his grin as he fielded calls about the disturbed woman in a parking lot. "Henry," he called, "you've outdone yourself." Henry tipped his mug, his eyes twinkling with the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Margaret's meltdown reached new heights. "This is kidnapping," she shrieked, leaning out her window. "I'll sue you all. The governor will hear about this." Her makeup streaked, her hair a wilted mess. She dialed her phone frantically, but her calls to lawyers, officials, even a local radio host, went unanswered. The crowd grew bolder, some snapping photos, others laughing openly. George Harper, our grizzled neighbor, shouted, "Looks like you parked in the wrong spot, lady." Ellen Ramsey, the Silver Oaks treasurer, stood nearby, clutching a box of documents, her face a mix of relief and resolve. Henry approached the maze, his voice carrying over Margaret's tirade. "Miss Hensley, we're just improving our property. You chose to park here. If you'd like, I can call a tow truck, though it might take a while to navigate the paths." The crowd roared with laughter, and Margaret's face twisted with fury. "You planned this, you old snake," she spat. Henry's smile didn't waver. 40 years of engineering teaches you to plan for contingencies, ma'am." The media frenzy exploded. Channel 5 News ran a live feed, the headline flashing, "HOA president trapped in rancher's fence maze." Reporters swarmed Henry, who handled their questions with humble precision. "Just exercising our property rights," he said. "I had no idea Miss Hensley would park in our construction zone." When pressed about the maze's complexity, he shrugged. "You learn to think ahead when you've built bridges for a living." His calm demeanor only fueled the story's viral spread, clips circulating online with captions like, "Texas Grandpa outsmarts HOA tyrant." The maze wasn't just a trap hit, was a catalyst. The publicity cracked open years of resentment against Margaret's reign. Silver Oaks residents, long silenced by her bullying, found their voices. Ellen Ramsey stepped forward, her box of documents a ticking bomb. She'd spent years enduring Margaret's abuse, quietly collecting evidence of financial misconduct. As reporters listened, she revealed forged signatures on HOA contracts, inflated invoices to Margaret's relatives, and bank transfers to accounts linked to her cousins. "She's been stealing from us," Ellen said, her voice steady. "Over $60,000 in 2 years." The crowd gasped, and Margaret's screams faltered. She slumped in her SUV, the fight draining from her as Ellen's words sank in. George Harper chimed in, recounting how Margaret had fined him $2,000 for planting unapproved roses. Other residents shared stories, fines for minor infractions, threats of liens, even harassment over holiday decorations. The maze had become more than a prank. It was a symbol of resistance, giving Willow Creek the courage to fight back. The final blow came at noon, as Margaret, still trapped, gave a tearful interview to Channel 7 News, claiming victimhood. Mid-rant, Detective Laura Bennett arrived with 2 uniformed officers, their handcuffs glinting in the sun. Bennett, a no-nonsense investigator who'd been working with Henry and Ellen behind the scenes, approached the maze. "Margaret Hensley," she called, "you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and forgery." The crowd fell silent, the weight of justice settling over the scene. Margaret's shock was cinematic. "This is a setup?" she wailed as officers navigated the maze to her SUV. "He framed me." She pointed at Henry, but her accusations crumbled under the evidence. Bennett held up a warrant, detailing fake vendor contracts, shell companies, and bank records tracing stolen funds to Margaret's accounts. The irony was perfect. While obsessing over our fence paint and grass height, she'd been robbing Silver Oaks blind. Officers escorted Margaret from her SUV, her hands cuffed, her fuchsia dress crumpled. The crowd erupted in cheers, phones capturing every step of her walk of shame. Eddie and Ray slunk away, their pickup peeling out as reporters chased them for comment. Vernon Tate, wisely, was nowhere to be seen. As Margaret was loaded into a patrol car, she glared at Henry, her eyes burning with defeat. He met her gaze, his expression calm but unyielding, a man who'd fought a war and won without raising a fist. That evening, over dinner, Henry revealed the full scope of his plan. "I knew she was crooked from the start," he said, slicing into a steak. "Her harassment was too desperate, too personal. Real HOA folks follow procedures. She was covering something." He'd suspected embezzlement early, noticing her flashy lifestyle didn't match her supposed income. Working with Ellen and Mark, he'd gathered evidence while the maze kept Margaret distracted. The construction was legal, but it was also bait, he said. She couldn't resist making a scene, and that's what brought her down. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. Margaret pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, receiving 4 years in prison and an order to repay $62,000 to Silver Oaks. The HOA elected a new board, led by Ellen, who canceled all of Margaret's fines and rewrote the bylaws to prevent future tyranny. Residents passed a resolution thanking the Caldwells, naming Henry an honorary member of Silver Oaks. "You gave us our community back," Ellen said, presenting him with a plaque at a packed town hall. Henry decided to keep the maze, turning it into a permanent fixture. He added a bronze sign, "Caldwell Ranch Peace Garden," dedicated to community and cleverness. It became a tourist draw, with visitors from across Texas snapping photos and marveling at the story. School groups toured it, teachers using it to discuss planning and perseverance. A local brewery even named a beer Maze IPA, with a label featuring a pink SUV. Life on the ranch returned to normal, but better. Dad's laugh came back, Mom's smiles were genuine, and I felt a new pride in our legacy. Every morning, Henry sat on the porch, rocking in his chair, his coffee mug steaming as he surveyed his masterpiece. When visitors asked how he'd pulled it off, he'd say, 40 years of engineering teaches you that the strongest structures are built on patience and precision. That goes for more than just fences." The maze stood as a testament to wisdom triumphing over tyranny, a reminder that bullies, no matter how loud, can't outlast a well-laid plan. Willow Creek hadn't just gotten rid of Margaret, it had found its spine, thanks to one man's quiet resolve. Months later, I walked the maze with Henry, the panels weathered but sturdy. "Did you ever worry it wouldn't work?" I asked. He chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "Tommy, when you build something right, it holds. Always." He paused, looking out over the ranch. "And when you stand up to a bully, you don't just win, you give others the courage to stand too." The story of the maze spread far beyond Willow Creek, a tale of justice that resonated with anyone who'd ever faced a petty tyrant. It wasn't just about a fence or a pink SUV, it was about fighting for what's yours, with brains, not brawn. As I watched Henry sip his coffee, the Texas sun rising over our land, I knew we'd done more than save the ranch. We'd built a legacy that would outlast us all. Thank you for following the Caldwell family's triumph over Margaret's tyranny. This story raises big questions about bullying, injustice, and how far we should go to fight back. Was Henry's maze a brilliant act of justice, or a step too far? Have you ever faced a bully like Margaret in an HOA or elsewhere? And how did you handle it? Share your stories and opinions in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective on standing up to unfairness in everyday life. Your thoughts could spark a powerful discussion, so don't hold back.